Hello and welcome to another game where we can witness Leela's devastating strategic play. This is her first win in TCEC's 15th season Premier Division. They played the opening using a 16-ply book, if I counted correctly, and in this game Leela started with knight f3, to which Fire replied c6, inviting white into the Slav defense. White can play e4 and after d5 knight c3 get into the two knights variation of the Caro-Kann, but in this game we have c4, d5, d4 and we are into the Slav. The game continued with knight f6, knight c3 and after pawn takes Leela played a4, preventing Fire to defend the c4 pawn with b5. This is a standard procedure in the Slav. And there are many possible moves in this position. They continued with knight a6, e4, bishop g4, bishop takes on c4 and bishop takes on f3. And white is forced to take with a g-pawn because the queen needs to defend d4. e6, and this is where the book ends. And in this position there are many possible ideas for white. Long castle is a bit harder to achieve in this position. You need to get out the bishop and the queen, and it's not necessarily good because the a-pawn being so far advanced, black can quickly open files on the queen side with b5. Staying with the king in the center and playing rook g1 was also tried before, but black played g6 and managed to open lines much quicker than white with the same b5 idea, and black won most of the games. Leela came up with the logical and also mostly played short castle and estimated that she's having a 1.4 pawn advantage. Finding a move for black is a bit easier since he needs to castle quickly because d5, opening up the center, is in white's pipeline. The dark squared bishop needs to come out. He obviously can't go to d6 because of e5. And he can't go to b4 either because he doesn't really want to give himself up for this pony. And then queen b3 is rather unpleasant, threatening to take out the knight and then the bishop. g6 with the idea of bishop g7 is too slow. White can immediately cause pain with d5. He wants to take here twice and there are no good solutions. So after castles, Fire played the only good move with the bishop. He moved it to e7 and saw the position pretty much equal. And in most games before, white tried the idea of king h1, rook g1, black has to play g6, and then white's idea is to play f4 and break with f5, weakening the light squares around the king. Leela went for another plan. She took the knight on a6 and after the recapture she played bishop e3. She gave up her bishop for that knight on the rim and opened up the b5 for black, where the b-pawn is a target. But on the upside, black's queenside pawn structure is in ruins. Fire would like to trade c6 for Leela's d4, but c5 is not possible without losing that pawn. The way forward for both of them is to intensify the pressure on the opponent's weakness while defending their own. So who's better? Well, let's see what happened next. Fire immediately attacked the pawn, Leela defended it, castles, and now knight e2. Leela is also attacking c6. Exchanging the weaknesses is not in Fire's favor because after queen takes and rook takes, she can also take on a6, which is a doubled pawn, but still. A pawn is a pawn, and white is better. So Fire went on defending the pawn on c6, but instead of defending it with the queen, he found a much better way of defending it with a rook by playing queen a5. Now the pawn is untouchable because of rook c8, trapping the queen. So Leela played rook c1, renewing the threat, because now after rook c8, she could give up her queen for two rooks and that would be advantageous in this position. So Fire defended with rook c8. And in this position, Leela found a great way to increase the pressure on c6 with rook d1, rook d3, and rook c3. Beautiful. So there followed rook d1, Fire played bishop f8, bishop f4, tickling the rook a bit, forcing him to make a decision. The rook didn't want to go back into the corner, after all he's not grounded or something, so he went to b7. And now rook d3, with the idea to get to c3. Now, since the bishop left from e3, c5 is possible without immediately losing the pawn. But it's not good, because the pawn is in a pin, so it can't exchange itself for the d-pawn. And Leela could play b3 to stop its advancement to c4, and then she could win it with rook c3 and bishop back to c3 if needed. Fire played instead bishop b4, stopping the rook from getting to c3. And now c5 would be a bit more playable, let's say, because the rook can't attack it from c3. But it's still not good, because the pawn would still be in a pin. But anyway, Leela ruled out c5 completely with queen d1. c5 now would be losing after some amazing tactics, starting with pawn takes. The rook can't take because of the mate on d8, and bishop takes runs into bishop d2, forcing the queen to b6, the only square where it can defend both the bishop and the mate on d8. But now comes bishop e3, and Leela will win the bishop next with b4. The queen right now wouldn't be able to take because of the mate on d8, so black would need to play something like h6. But the bishop would still be lost after b4. Queen takes, rook d8 check, decoying the rook from the defense of the bishop. And after rook takes, queen takes, bishop f8, bishop c5, and game over. So instead of c5, Fire played queen b6, because queen d1 was a dual-purpose move. It not only stopped c5, but it was also threatening to win the exchange by putting pressure on the dark-squared bishop with rook c4, rook b3, and bishop d2 or bishop d6. So Fire moved the queen to be able to defend the bishop with a5. There followed rook c4, a5, and now queen c2, quite simply threatening d5, attacking the c-pawn. Fire now attacked the b-pawn with bishop f8, b3, and it's very hard to stop Leela now. If bishop back to b4 to stop rook c3, then d5, pawn takes, rook d7, d6, and white is winning. Instead of bishop b4, Fire intends to defend the c6 pawn with the knight, so he played knight d7, rook c3, knight b8, king g2, h6, bishop g3, bishop g4, rook d3, and now that the pressure on the c-pawn is reduced, knight a6. Leela now finally breaks with d5 and enters a variation where her prospects are better despite being down an exchange. Fire now played bishop c5, shielding the pinned rook, and threatening both knight b4, forking the queen and the rook, and c takes d5, since now the pawn is not pinned anymore. Leela just took on e6, and after knight b4, she sacked the exchange. Queen takes, e takes f7 check, rook takes, and Fire is only one pawn down for the exchange. But Leela probably saw very deep into the position. She now played knight f4, heading to the very juicy and aggressive e6 square. But can Leela support the knight on that square? They continued with bishop b6, knight e6, queen e7, queen c4, queen back to b4, rook d6, queen takes, and pawn takes. And Fire now obviously wants to attack the knight, but before moving the rook to e8, he defends the pawn with c5. f4, g6, not allowing the pawn to f5, where it would support the knight. King f3, rook e8, king g4, and it looks like f5 is finally coming, cementing the knight on that beautiful e6 square. h5 check, king g5, king h7, f5, pawn takes, and now Leela makes use of a little tactic and takes on h5, because a fork on g5 is also threatened. King g8, knight g5, and Fire has to give up the exchange now. If rook f8, then rook g6, king h8, and knight e6, threatening bishop e5, mate. This would force f4, but after bishop h4, black has to give up the exchange anyway. So after knight g5, Fire played f4, knight takes rook, king takes, bishop takes on f4, rook takes on e4, bishop g5, and nothing can stop the f-pawn from queening. Rook takes on c4, f4, rook d4, rook f6 check, king e8, h4, c4, f5, king d7, rook f7 check, king c6, rook e7, bishop c5, rook e8, king b7, rook e5, bishop d6, rook e3, bishop b4, and it's obvious that Leela is winning. Even if they win each other's c and f pawn, the h4 pawn wins the game. f6, c3, rook e2, rook d1, king g6, rook b1, f7, rook b2, rook e4, bishop f8, rook e8, rook b6 check, king h7, bishop d6, now Leela gets a queen, the bishop takes, rook takes, c2, rook f1, and the c-pawn is stopped. The h-pawn will promote soon, and the game was adjudicated in Leela's favor a couple of moves later, in this position. A very beautiful game in which Fire was mostly forced to defend passively the whole game. Please subscribe, like and share, and check out some of the other videos. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.